Hello.
I'm Grace.
And I'm Maddie.
In this podcast, we will be going into detail about 6 film techniques and hopefully giving you the information that you need to create effective and interesting films.
Get ready because we have a lot to teach you.
Parallel editing, or known as cross-cutting, is the technique of alternating 2 or more scenes that often happen simultaneously but in different locations.
For example, 2 scenes where people are running. One of the people in the scene is running away from someone and the person eventually catches up to them.
The person in the other scene is running to get to a shop before it closes, but it makes it seem like both of these characters are running after each other.
Also known as cross-cutting, parallel editing gained recognition with Edwin Porter in his movie The Great Chain Robbery in 1903.
In The Lonedale Operator, David Griffith further developed the technique by using parallel editing to provoke suspense.
The picture tells the story of a young girl who substitutes her dad as a train station's telegraph operator during payroll day.
When robbers try ransacking the place, the young girl locks herself in the telegraph room where she asks for help.
Cross-cutting shows 3 relevant parties to the plot. 1. The frightened girl.
2. The robbers trying to break in.
And 3. The approaching search party.
Next we have Foley sound. If you want to be technical, Foley, which is named after sound effects artist Jack Foley, is the reproduction of everyday sound effects that are added to film, video and other media in post-production to enhance the audio quality.
But it's pretty much someone just making a sound to form audio for film by using random objects and movement. Examples include:
a pair of gloves sound like bird wings flapping.
An arrow or thin stick makes a whooshing sound.
An old chair makes a controllable creaking sound.
A heavy staple gun combined with other small metal sounds makes good gun noises. Possibilities are endless.
The best Foley art is so well integrated into a film that it goes unnoticed by the audience. It helps create a sense of reality within a scene. What is now called Foley originated as sound effects added to live broadcasts of radio drama from radio studios around the world in the early 1920s.
The sounds could not usually be reliable enough to play on cue, so the Foley artist would have to play the sounds live on broadcast.
Then of course it came into film.
When Warner Studios released The Jazz Singer, its first film to include sound, Universal knew it needed to stay competitive and called for any employees who had radio experience to come forward.
Modern Foley art has progressed as recording technology has progressed. Today, sounds do not have to be recorded live on a single track of audio.
Foley sounds are added to the film in post-production after the film has been shot.
Finally, why and when are Foley artists needed? Basically when a sound is needed that can't be made properly or safely in real life, for example gunshots. Next up, of course, it's the loot and bust technique.
The loot and bust technique is an amazing and popular technique named after a horror film producer named Val Lewton.
The loot and bust technique is a scene that slowly builds tension.
Just like that.
But then it gives the viewer an unexpected jolt with something that turns out to be completely harmless.
The loot and bust technique was first used in Cat People in 1942 in the scene where Irina is following Alice.
The viewer expects Irina to turn into a panther and attack Alice.
As the camera focuses on Alice, the viewer hears what sounds like a hissing panther, but it just turns out to be a bus pulling up.
And that's what gives the technique its name, loot and bust.
The loot and bust technique is something that is still used in horror films today, especially slasher films, such as Friday the 13th and the Halloween series films.
These films were dark and atmospheric and worked with the assumption that what you can see isn't nearly as scary as what you can't.
Which is a motto that horror producers strive off of. Now for the rule of thirds. It's a bit more complicated, but we'll get there.
The rule of thirds is a concept in film production in which the frame is divided into 9 imaginary sections.
You mentally divide up the image using 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines.
You then position the important images in your scene along the lines or the points where they meet.
In more basic terms, it's your brain telling you what is most important to look at.
In a typical shot, your subject should be somewhere within the grid divides. The subject can be both the character and the object since they often work together.
Objects need room around them to enable the viewer to see them more clearly. If the character is in the middle of the frame, all attention goes to them, and the object would no longer be a critical piece of the frame. If the subject is small, use an intersection of the grid. If the subject is large or long, try placing it along one entire line. If the subject is looking in a certain direction, leave the empty space in the same direction that they are looking towards.
If the subject is moving, leave the empty space in the direction that they are moving in.
This gives the subject a sense of moving forward and allows the viewer to see a little of where they're headed.
Last but not least, it's, drumroll please,
single point perspective.
The single point perspective is a way of crafting cinematic shots with the near perfect symmetry.
It is when an image has a single vanishing point on the horizon and all shapes get smaller in all directions with increasing distance from the eye.
In the old days of cinema, one point perspective was common because of budgets and the practices of filmmaking.
If you look too far left, right or up, you see the edge of sets or the rafters holding lights. It became a traditional form of cinematography simply out of necessity.
A name usually associated with one point perspective is Stanley Kubrick. Many of Kubrick's films are, in one way or another, violent.
Different authors have associated that search for symmetry with a desire to create a psychological reaction in the audience.
Like the one felt when viewing the long corridor sequences in The Shining, the effect is so intense that even when nothing is happening, viewers tend to expect something to happen.
Kubrick and his one-point perspective shots force you to look at the world differently. When you crouch down, you're looking at the world from the point of view of somebody of that height, a child maybe. And last of all, when do you use this technique? Basically, it's when you want to build tension and want the audience to feel on edge.
And that's a wrap for film techniques that we'll be covering today.
Well done for getting this far. That was a lot of information in one go.
We hope that we have fueled your knowledge and given you more understanding and ideas for future film technique uses and camera work.
Thank you for listening.
Bye!